He's the sort of person that once you meet him, you want to be around him and you want to follow him.
I think Mike Leavitt is one of those talents that you only come across once in a generation.
Well, Michael was born in Cedar City, Utah. He was the first child. He was the first of 6 sons.
Went to school in Cedar City pretty much from the time he went to elementary school to junior high. He completed high school in Cedar City.
I think the first time that Michael left home was when he was 17 and he went to the National Guard.
And then came back and put in his papers, served an LDS mission, and then went to SUU.
And then got involved in the insurance business with his dad. And that's where it really all started.
The first leave that he took from working at the Leavitt Group was when his father ran for governor. And he stepped up to the plate and became his campaign manager. And that was sort of indicative of I can fix it attitude that he always had.
And then in 1991 decided to run for governor. He got elected in 1992 and was governor for 10 years up until I think 2003, where he was the administrator of the EPA. And in 2005 was asked by President George Bush to be Secretary of Health and Human Services, where he served up until 2009. And then he created an entity called Leavitt Partners, and that's where he's at now.
You know, Michael, as a very little boy, believed that he could fix whatever the problem was. He had that characteristic we noticed very, very early. And of course, because he had 5 years to grow up before he had a little brother, he was sort of set up to be the leader.
I remember when he was 4 years old, the 4th of July parade, and they had a king and a queen, little youth, and he wanted to be on that parade. His mother didn't want him to, but he says, I know I'll win if you let me go. Well, he did, and he won. So we have pictures of him riding the float down Main Street on the 4th of July.
And I remember going to parent-teacher conference when he was in the 2nd grade, and his teacher was a lovely lady, was very impressed with him, and she said, I think this boy's going to be something important, maybe the Vice President of the United States.
Dad was always an entrepreneur. He was the oldest of 6 boys, and he constantly looked for ways to involve his brothers in different side businesses.
When he was about 13 years old, 14, I remember taking him into the bank, meeting him because we had bought a little farm, met the bank. The banker loaned him money to buy about 13 head of heifers, and this was his first entrepreneurial thing of risking this way.
He has a lot of admirable characteristics, but what people don't know is he's a well-rounded athlete. He was a jack of all trades. In fact, in high school, in one game during the football season, he played 11 different positions in one game. He was the starting point guard for his basketball team. He was actually in the game when his team overcame a 6-point deficit with 11 seconds to go against their arch rival Dixie. He was All-State in baseball as a shortstop. And on his birthday a few years ago, he had a hole-in-one.
So the first moment my dad saw my mom, it was, you know, just that spark that everyone talks about, and they were in church, and he was just visiting. He wanted to see his friend speak, and she was sitting in the lobby, and he rushed over to her and he said, oh, hi, I'm Mike, and she said, I'm Jackie. And then he said, you know, my brothers are planning this get-together at our cabin, and we're hoping that you could come. I need a date. And she said, well, sure. You know, and of course, after they started talking and he was able to confirm the date, then of course he called his brothers and said, guys, we gotta get something going this weekend because I met this girl and I can't wait for you to meet her. I remember distinctly my dad bringing us into the living room, and then at that point, I was 9, and he said, kids, what do you think about if I run for governor?
Remind you, I was 8 years old, so when he said that he was going to be running a race, first thing I thought of was him in some high shorts on the track about to run a race.
had my circle of friends, and I asked the question, will we have to move to Washington, D.C.? He said, no, we can stick around here. In fact, there's a pretty decent house on South Temple that we get to move into, and at that point I was sold.
Sure enough, we were at every convention or every meeting. We were able to hand out flyers on porches, and we were just so much a part of that process.
And I remember watching him work day after day. I think he lost like 25 pounds or something just because he was working so hard.
We got a phone call from someone, and I answered it, and they asked for Mike Leavitt, and I remember saying, he's not here. He's out champagning for the third night in a row.
He made a point about not talking about the other candidates, and so it was always a very positive experience for us as children because, of course, we naturally would say, oh man, that so-and-so who's running against you, he said this and that was unfair, and he was always really great at nipping it and just say, we're all just doing the best we can.
But he kept working and working, and eventually he rose up to the top and won the election.
I do recall my brother and his friends getting a bunch of confetti and dropping it over the top of his back like a coach with the Gatorade bath, and thinking he might be upset, but he was in pure jubilation, and so were we.
Of course I rejoiced for him because I knew that there was an adventure ahead.
So I'm the only daughter, and so for me, I was his date. When my mom couldn't attend, I was by his side. I attended all sorts of meetings and functions and dinners, so I loved it. I put my party dress on, and I'd be right by his side.
I think my parents really did a good job in making sure that we remained grounded. Most of the time my dad was governor, we lived in our private residence. We were expected while we were at the governor's mansion to always make our beds, to clean our rooms. That was all on us. Nobody else did it for us.
I remember him talking about teaching his 17-year-old kids in Sunday school and how he had to go home and get his lesson prepared because that was coming up Sunday.
Jackie and all of the children were invited to attend this summer event. Well, the children get there and they get all kinds of gift bags, and they get to see sights that the average person would never get to see. So it's wrap-up time, we're heading back to the airport, and he said, we're going to stop for some food. And he's told the driver to go to McDonald's. And he got inside McDonald's and he said, look, you kids have had a great time, you've seen things, you've received gifts. And he said, but that's not the real world. The real world is the people at McDonald's and what you see there. And so don't get used to being treated the way you've been treated the last 3 days, because that isn't the life that we live, and that isn't the real world. And I thought that was a great message for all of us.
I think about his vision for expanding transportation in the state, where he reconstructed, with others, I-15.
Governor Leavitt was very clear with us that we would not be able to be under construction during the Olympics, and then he asked us to go out and find solutions. We came up with a solution that was completely out of the box. Nobody had ever done anything like it anywhere in the country.
He gathered other governors together and formed Western Governors University.
It's not just a new university, it's a new way of doing education, this competency-based measure to measure learning rather than time. And it simply would never have happened without his leadership, but also his ongoing support.
Governor Leavitt, was deeply committed to finishing his third term when he gets a call from the President of the United States. And the President essentially says, will you come join me in my cabinet? I need someone to run the Environmental Protection Agency. So I got to see his rise in Washington from the very beginning. I had people tell me before we left that, Washington's a big place, and Mike Leavitt would, maybe couldn't use some of his folksy language or style in Washington and get away with it. And when I got to Washington, it didn't take long for me to realize, and for people around me to tell me, how good he was.
Subsequently, President Bush appointed him to head the largest department in the federal government.
And I watched him make a contribution in the Bush administration, where he became the go-to cabinet member for a lot of difficult issues.
he began to recognize that the United States was very inadequately prepared for a pandemic.
When he was talking about all of the bad things that could happen in America, and he said, you know, Americans need to step up and prepare. And he said, I know many of you live in an apartment, but if you just put even a case of tuna fish under your bed, that would help. Well, the late night talk hosts just loved that. They came on to say that Cabinet Secretary Leavitt announces that everyone should have tuna fish. So the next day we were at the office and someone said, now Mike, how did you feel about all the talk show hosts? And he says, in retrospect, that was really a funny thing, and they did the right thing. I loved their jokes about it.
People ask me, you know, what's your dad like? And he was a dad to me, you know. Surprisingly, he did everything he could to make it normal. I never felt an absence in my life. I mean, physically he wasn't there, but we could always call him. I still remember the number, it was 560 Mike.
And you never just talk to my dad. You have to be active doing something. And so we'd always be playing balance games or something. We'd be talking to him, we'd be standing up, and we'd be trying to push each other over. It's kind of how we communicate.
So when I was 14, two friends of mine and I wanted to celebrate our independence by not going to scout camp. And after some failed inspirational speeches, he challenged us to a game. If he beat us three in a basketball game, we would have to go to scout camp. If we won, he'd leave us alone. And we were happy because we liked the idea of running circles on him. But he was real technical and he just showed up that day, and I don't know what old man powers he was drawing from, but to our bitter astonishment, he beat us. And we went to scout camp.
All of the grandchildren call my dad Saba, which is Hebrew for grandpa. And so just a few days ago, she said to me, Mom, I love Saba because he smells as good as cookies and he calls me princess.
You know, it's not his professional accomplishments that I'm most proud of. It's the type of person he is, and I've seen that time and time again, and just try to emulate it as best I can.
But he was just a great dad, and that's how we know him, and that's how he's always been.
When I think about his legacy, I see the recurring theme of opening up opportunities to others.
They will remember him as someone that had a vision and got things done.
I think that Mike Leavitt will be remembered as someone who could look around corners, who could see the future and usher Utah into a better future.
Governor Leavitt was influential in bringing about changes to education, to transportation, to cleaning up the environment, and to any number of other issues.
Clearly the Olympics, you know, was a great success and will stand as a legacy.
A legacy of serving rural Utah, a legacy of reinventing our welfare system in this state, a legacy of investing in transportation infrastructure.
He changed people's lives. He changed my life significantly. I'm a different person as a result of knowing Mike Leavitt.
More than any of the things that he accomplished, I think they'll remember that he was kind and that he interacted with them in a very personal way and that they loved him.
Dad, I'm so proud of you. I know that you've received this Giant in the City Award because of your giant heart and how much you do for not only our family, but for the state of Utah.
Dad, congratulations. We love you. Great work.
I love you, Dad, and don't let this go to your head.
I'm very, very thankful and proud to be your son.
Hey, congratulations, Dad. I'm proud of you and couldn't be happier that you're receiving this award with all these fine people on this great night.
Love you so much and so proud to call you my dad.